Welcome back to the Table of Grace, where we pull up a seat, open the Word, and feast on the truth of God's promises. I'm Carla.
And I'm Madi. Today we're kicking off a brand new 3-part series titled Called, Covered, Commissioned.
And over the next 3 episodes, we'll walk through the life of Moses, from his divine calling to the grace that covered his fear, to the commissioning that led to the very presence of God resting among his people through the tabernacle.
But before Moses ever stood at the burning bush, before he parted the Red Sea, before he built the tabernacle, there was a woman, a mother, a life giver, a protector. Her name was Jochebed. But before we meet Jochebed, let's go back to Exodus chapter 1, verses 7 through 13. It says, "And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters, to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses."
Yeah, I think that's right.
Sure. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because the children of Israel and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor.
So right away, we see it. God's people were multiplying, and Pharaoh saw it as a threat. He wasn't just trying to control them. He wanted to crush the future of a nation by attacking its children.
He couldn't stop the strength of Israel through labor, so he tried to stop them through death, killing the future before it had a chance to grow.
But even in bondage, fear, and darkness, faith still found a voice, and that voice was Jochebed.
But here's something so beautiful tucked into this story. The midwives feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. Exodus 1:17 says, "But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. They risked everything to protect life, because honoring God meant more than pleasing a king."
That bold faith made space for Jochebed's bold faith. Their courage didn't just save babies, it laid the groundwork for a deliverer.
When Pharaoh commanded that a Hebrew baby boy was killed, all the baby boys, Jochebed had every reason to live in fear, but instead she chose faith.
And when she could no longer hide him, she did something radical. She didn't panic. She didn't break down. She built something. She crafted an ark. Yes, Scripture uses that word deliberately, just like Noah, an ark of protection, an ark of surrender, an ark of faith.
She coated it with pitch, just like Noah's, and laid her son inside. This wasn't just a handmade basket. It was a holy offering.
She released him into the river that was supposed to drown him, but God used that very river to deliver him.
And here's the miracle. The ark didn't drift into danger. It landed exactly where it needed to, at the feet of Pharaoh's daughter. The place that held the threat also held the provision.
So, mama, mentor, leader, listen up. God sees the basket you've built. He sees what you've surrendered. He knows where your offering has landed. You may have released it into the unknown, but God's hand is on the current.
Jochebed's name means Jehovah is glory, and it points us to the author of this entire story. She didn't speak on stages or lead a movement. She simply obeyed. And through that obedience, she placed purpose into the water and let God write the rest of the story.
And sometimes the hardest kind of obedience is letting go. It's trusting that what you released in faith isn't lost. It's just out of your hands and into His. Jochebed didn't get to follow the basket. She had no idea where it would land, but her surrender made room for God's sovereignty. And that same obedience that launched Moses into the river would one day lead him through the wilderness. Now, fast forward, Moses is a grown man, but he's not in the palace anymore. He's in the wilderness, tending sheep, covered in dust, exiled, forgotten, or so it seems.
And yet, this is where God chooses to speak. not in a temple, not in a throne room, but in the dusty silence on the backside of the desert.
This tells us something so important. Jochebed's faith sparked something in Moses. Her name, Jochebed, means Jehovah is glory. This tells you everything about where her hope was rooted.
Exodus 2:2 says, she saw that her baby was good. That same word God used when he looked at his creation. Jochebed saw something God had touched.
She didn't just see a baby. She saw purpose, future, value. She saw something worth protecting and believed God would honor her faith.
And he did. Moses was rescued, raised, and eventually commissioned. But it all started because of a woman who feared God more than Pharaoh. Hebrews 11:23-24 tells us, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter.
Now fast forward, Moses is grown in exile and tending sheep in the wilderness, and that's exactly where God shows up. Exodus 3 says Moses saw a bush that burned but wasn't consumed. But here's the part we can't miss. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him. That's Exodus 3:4.
All right, y'all. Don't miss the detail in verse 4. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him. That's the turning point. Literally. God didn't speak until Moses turned. He didn't call out while Moses was walking away, because God doesn't talk to your back.
That part right there is everything. Moses had to turn around before God spoke. He had to stop, notice, and move towards the fire. He speaks when you turn your attention, when you notice the holy in your ordinary. Some of us are crying out for a word, but we're running in the opposite direction.
You can't be running from God, avoiding him, or focused on your own path and expect to clearly hear his voice. You have to walk toward the fire to hear his direction.
Because sometimes God doesn't shout over the noise. He waits for your stillness. Some of us are begging God for answers, but our backs are turned, begging for clarity, confirmation, direction, but our lives are moving so fast in the opposite direction that we would never hear him, even if he answered. We're busy, we're distracted, we're exhausted, and truthfully, sometimes we avoid slowing down, because deep down we know that if we stop, he might ask us to change something. And friend, I've been there, so focused on fixing everything for God that I stopped listening to God. My calendar was full, my heart was overwhelmed, and all the while he was waiting, just waiting on me to turn aside.
Maybe your burning bush is right in front of you. Maybe the Lord has been trying to get your attention through something you've overlooked, a delay, a door that won't open, a relationship, a quiet nudge in your spirit.
God doesn't set a bush on fire to entertain you. He does it to encounter you. But that encounter only happens when you stop, when you turn aside, and when you dare to look closer and ask, Lord, is that you?
That's good. Mm-hmm. God is still setting bushes on fire, but the question is, are you turning aside to look?
And where does that bush show up? Not on a mountaintop, not in a temple. It shows up on the backside of the desert. That's where Moses was. Exodus 3:1 tells us that he was leading the flock to the backside of the desert. Not exactly the place you'd expect to encounter the glory of God, right? But that's just like him.
God loves to meet us in places we think doesn't matter. The jobs that feel beneath us, the seasons that feel dry, the work that feels unseen, because those moments, those hidden places, are where our hearts are shaped.
The backside of the desert doesn't get applause. No one was following Moses there with cameras or hashtags. It was just him, a sheep, and dust, and God. But here's the thing, it wasn't punishment. It was preparation.
He was learning how to lead in the quiet, how to care for the stubborn, how to navigate the wandering. Sound familiar?
Exactly. Moses wasn't just tending sheep. He was learning how to shepherd people. God was teaching him in the wilderness what he would only one day need in the war zone.
And maybe you're there now, your own backside of the desert. It feels hidden, dry, ordinary. But friend, don't despise the desert. That's where the fire falls.
That's where God sets something ablaze, not to destroy it, but to get your attention, to call you out of the silence and into purpose. Because he knows if you'll be faithful with sheep, he can trust you with the nation. Because shepherding sheep taught Moses how to lead patiently, intercede faithfully, feed constantly, and protect fiercely. Before he ever stood before Pharaoh, he had to learn to stand with the sheep.
God didn't rush the process. He trained him in silence to prepare him for influence.
And maybe someone listening today feels stuck in a dry, hidden place. But friend, God might be lighting a fire there. So the Lord speaks from the bush and calls Moses to go back to Egypt and leads his people and to lead his people out of bondage.
And Moses responds not with excitement, but insecurity. Who am I that I should go? Exodus 3:11.
Sound familiar? We've all had those who am I moments. I'm not qualified. I'm not ready. I'm not enough. But God doesn't list Moses' resume. He doesn't say you're smart, strong, or skilled. He says, certainly I will be with thee. Exodus 3:12.
The call of God doesn't depend on our confidence. It depends on his presence. And that's what this series is all about. Called, not because we're worthy. Covered, not because we're fearless. Commissioned, because he goes with us.
So let's go back again because there's a beautiful thread here. The Bible uses the word ark only twice for Noah and for Moses' basket. 2 different storms, 2 different vessels, but the same divine covering. Noah built his ark in obedience. Jochebed built hers in surrender. And in both cases, God shut the door. He sealed it with pitch. He preserved what was placed inside. When God covers something, the enemy can't destroy it. That baby in the basket was wrapped in faith, covered by prayer and anchored in purpose.
And here's the key. The ark was never about escaping the storm. It was about surviving it by the grace of God.
So maybe you're listening today and you've placed something or someone into an ark of surrender, a child, a ministry, a calling, and you're watching it drift into the unknown. Let that encourage you. God is the one guiding the current.
Pharaoh's river became God's delivery route. What the enemy meant for destruction, God used for destiny.
He always does.
Let's trace the line again. A mother releases, a river carries, a palace raises, a desert humbles, and a bush burns.
From basket to bush, God's hand was always there. He wasn't just calling Moses, he was crafting him.
And maybe you're in the middle of your own wilderness. Maybe you're staring at your own burning bush. God's not asking for your confidence. He's asking for your surrender.
The fire doesn't consume when God is in it. It refines, it draws you closer, and it reveals what's next.
So today, whether you feel like Jochebed, laying something down in faith, or like Moses, wondering if God could possibly use you, know this, the same God who called them calls you. Next week, we'll continue the story in episode 2, Covered When Grace Meets Fear. We'll talk about how God responds when we hesitate and how grace meets us right in the middle of our weakness.
And if today's episode encouraged you, we'd love for you to share it with a friend and follow the Table of Grace on Facebook for daily devotions, encouragement, and scriptures. And feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us anytime at tableofgracepod@gmail.com. That's tableofgracepod@gmail.com.
And if you're looking for a church home, we'd love to invite you to join us at Covenant Church in Monroe, North Carolina. Come be a part of what God is doing.
And thank you so much for spending time with us today. And always remember, grace is always the centerpiece.
No pressure, no perfection.
Just grace.